Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition in Healing Our Children, a very special webinar series that we're doing. It was prompted by the pandemic and all that we're going through. Tonight, we have a fabulous speaker and our very own, very special and illustrious national president and chair of the board of NCNW is here with us tonight, along with two other special guests that we'll introduce in just a moment. But before we get started, we want to give Mr. Johannes an opportunity to explain how to use GoToWebinar if you've not used it before, even if you have. While we're waiting for Mr. Johannes, I think he must be attending to some backstage business. Let me go ahead and introduce somebody who needs no introduction. I don't think there's anything that she can't do. She's been president of the only two women's colleges for Black women in the United States, both Spelman and Bennett. She was director of the National Museum of African History, which is a Smithsonian institution. She is highly respected by museum curators all over the country. She advises corporations on whether or not their movies and artistic productions are culturally accurate. And she's taken time to be president of the National Council of Negro Women. Please join me in welcoming the one, the only, Dr. Janetta Betch Cole.
My NCNW sisters, my brothers, my siblings all, good evening. And a very warm welcome to this second Toyota-sponsored webinar on healing our children. Because these webinars are being organized and facilitated by our sister executive director, Janice Mathis, I know that each will be highly informative. Each of the webinars will issue a clarion call for us to take action in the interest of Black women, our families, and our communities. However, I have really been looking forward to this second in this webinar series. Why? Because Dr. Fleda Mask Jackson is the featured speaker. Now, I am familiar with Dr. Jackson's work on the impact of racial and gendered stress on maternal and infant outcomes for African Americans. Indeed, I can personally testify that Fleda Mask Jackson is one of our nation's outstanding scholars, educators, and activists whose work is dedicated to eliminating racial disparities in birth and maternal outcomes. But here's why I've really been looking forward to this webinar. Because I knew it would be a kind of reunion for me and my Spelman sister. Now, as Attorney Mathis will surely say when she formally introduces Dr. Jackson, Fleda is what I would call a Spelman College twofer. That is, she is a graduate of Spelman College. During the time that I had the extraordinary honor of serving as Spelman's president, Dr. Fleda Mask Jackson was also a visiting professor in Spelman's psychology department. And so during those years, I had many opportunities to be with Fleda, understand her profound passion about the health of Black women and our children. I also want to say how incredibly grateful we are at NCNW for the support that we are receiving from the Toyota Motor Corporation to sponsor these webinars. And so it will be a joy for all of us shortly to be greeted by Paige Barton of Toyota. So, Fleda, I'm sending you a big virtual Spellman hug. And please know I'm so proud, so pleased that you're with us tonight as the featured speaker for this Toyota sponsored webinar. Sister ED, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. You know, when Dr. Cole came to NCNW almost 2 years ago, she gave us very clear and very specific instructions. She said, I want this organization to become more intergenerational. And whenever social justice is being discussed, I want NCNW to have a seat at the table. And I can say from being up close and working with her, she has been a woman of her word and is leading us precisely in the direction of intergenerationality and being more active in social justice issues. Thank you for that, Dr. Cole. And now, Paige Barton. Paige holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a minor in psychology from Wiley College. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because Denzel Washington, you remember just like I do, the 2007 movie about the great debaters, one of my favorite movies of all time, well, against all odds. Well, you know, this is a woman who can beat the odds. She's a Wiley College graduate. She is also a veteran of the United States military. And so we owe her a great debt for her sacrifice and service on behalf of the country. She joined Toyota in 2006, although she looked like she just graduated from Wiley last year. She's been at Toyota now for about 14 years. She rose through the ranks in a very competitive environment at Toyota. Not everyone can make a career out of working at Toyota, but she has succeeded in doing that and succeeded in stellar fashion. She is chief of staff to the general counsel of Toyota. Now, if you have not practiced law, that may not carry any special significance. But the general counsel is the lawyer for the entire company. And if you're chief of staff to the lawyer who is in charge of all the legal affairs, as well as she's chief of staff to the chief legal officer and the chief diversity officer, this is a woman with power and influence. We're so delighted to welcome Paige Barton to say a few words on behalf of our sponsor, Toyota.
Thank you so much, Attorney Mathis. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So my name is Paige Barton, Chief of Staff to the General Counsel and Chief Diversity Officer of Toyota Motor North America. And on behalf of our company, our team members, our dealers, our suppliers, and strategic partners across North America, it is my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Toyota is so proud to continue to support the mission and outreach of National Council of Negro Women. Tonight's webinar, part 2 of the Healing Our Children series, is a perfect example of how Toyota continues to address relevant issues Black women face and empower them and their families. As a company dedicated to diversity and inclusion, we are pleased to be a part of this stitch in the fabric that strengthens our community. On a personal note, as a woman who grew up in South Central Los Angeles, a graduate of Crenshaw High School, I know firsthand how exposure and opportunities can create boundless possibilities. I understand how important education and knowledge sharing is, not only for our children, but for the parents and the families of our children. I am extremely appreciative excited and very interested in tonight's webinar. These unprecedented times, and as the next generation, or during these unprecedented times, and as our next generation is looking to us for guidance, and to help them navigate a world filled with uncertainty, violence, pain, hurt, and what we say to them now is and will have a profound effect on them and our nation. Thank you to NC&W, Attorney Mathis, Dr. Cole, for helping our parents and our communities, including myself, find the words and find our voices. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Barton. Thank you for being here tonight. Well, this webinar series is inspired by a poem that was written back in the 1960s. And you say, well, have things changed at all? Maybe not as much as they should have. There was one stanza of the poem, or at least a part of a stanza, that really struck me. She starts out by asking a poignant question: what shall I tell my children who are Black? And she goes through Black is night, Black is sin, Black is the devil, and all the things that are negatively associated with being Black. But she kind of talks herself out of that mood as she goes through the poem and ends up saying, so he, talking about her son, must survive for the good of all humanity. He must and will survive. I have drunk deeply at the lake from the foundation of my Black culture, sat at the knee and learned from Mother Africa, discovered the truth of my heritage, the truth so often obscured and omitted. And I find I have much to say to my Black children. So she starts out not knowing what to say, but then she thinks about Africa and thinks about her heritage and says, I got a whole lot to tell him, and I'm gonna hurry up and tell him. I'm not the speaker tonight, but it kind of touches me after all that we've been through. It is now my privilege to introduce Fleda Mask Jackson, PhD. She is the leader and creator of Save 100 Babies, a cross-sector network based in Atlanta, Georgia, devoted to social determinants, asset-based approach for eliminating racial disparities in birth and maternal outcomes. She was a professor of applied public health at the Rollins School of Public Health and a visiting scholar in the psychology department at Spelman College. So that's why Dr. Janetta Cole is looking like, I really should be doing this introduction because this is my girl. But we're gonna steal a little bit of her thunder tonight. With academic preparation in education, psychology, and Dr. Cole's field of anthropology, Dr. Jackson's work is aimed at advancing the well-being of women, children, families, and communities. For you staunch NC&W members, doesn't that sound a lot like our mission? To lead, advocate for, and empower women of African descent, their families, and communities. Over the past decade, her work has been devoted to the study of the intersection of racial and gendered stress, resilience, and resistance, and its impact on the health and reproductive outcomes among African American women. She's been supported by organizations such as the Centers for Disease Control, the Ford Foundation. Her research has been cited in numerous publications and journals. She is a leading authority on stress from gendered racism and its impact on infant and maternal outcomes. She is the author of numerous peer-reviewed scientific articles, book chapters, and referred and public presentation on the topic. Her work has also been cited in major newspapers, magazines, and media outlets that include ProPublica, Vox, Ebony, Essence, and CNN. Then there was When the Bow Breaks, a PBS series. Unnatural causes. Is inequality making us sick? What a question that is. She has worked collaboratively and conducted research with health agencies and academic institutions in across the nation, really, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Wisconsin. She has served as a consultant and advisor for a wide range of organizations that include the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, the Center for Excellence in Women's Health at Harvard Medical School, the Ford Foundation. She is indeed an expert. She is so much recognized in her field that she received the Spelman College Alumni Achievement Award in Health and Science and the Delta Sigma Theta Award for Health Activism. She's been honored by the city of Atlanta, and tonight we are honored by her presence, Dr. Fleta Mask Jackson.
My sisters and my brothers, we're obviously having some technical difficulties. We know that Dr. Fleta Mask Jackson is nearby. Trying to join us.
We're looking for the audio, the camera, but that's
Here we are. Okay. We're in. Okay.
Yay! Technology is wonderful when it works.
hello, everybody. We're in now. Go take this somewhere. I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
Can you
can.
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. We're ready. We're ready. I am just delighted to be here with all of you from around the country. Boy, technology is good, but when it's bad, it's a mess. And I'm now stressed out, but that's okay. I will move further on. It is just delightful. I can't hear me, but you say you can hear me, and that's all I need to know, that you can hear me. So it is just, I am just I'm just full of joy to be with all of you here today, this afternoon rather, and especially Dr. Cole. I didn't hear her words, but I have words to say to her. And my words are, it was almost 20 years ago, I came to her office and I said, I have this project that I'm going to do, and I need to take leave. And I didn't know what she'd say, but she said, my sister, go forth and do this. And now 20 years later, I've been in this work, and I love you, and I thank you for your encouragement all these years. I would have never thought that this would have been a new career for me. I started in education, was really the focus of my work, had no idea that I would land and be part of this ever-growing, something that's got national attention in terms of women's health around giving birth to babies. And so I thank you, Dr. Cole. And so when Janice invited me, and I said, well, Dr. Cole is in the leadership here, and Janice, your reputation precedes you. I know many things about your wonderful work, so it is an honor and a pleasure for me to be with you all tonight. Let's get going. So I have entitled this On the Other Side, The Journey on the Quest for Birth Equity. If you go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Uh-oh, can you move my next slide? Okay, if you can't move the next slide, okay. This is a March of Dimes report card, which they give out every year. And it's a report card of prematurity. And Black babies are twice as likely to die before their first birthday. And one of the major causes for them dying before their first birthday is because they're born premature. So they're born 7 months, so many weeks early. They're too small, too little, too small, and too early. And so our babies don't make it as well as other babies. Now, let me say this from the very beginning. Most of our babies do fine. Most of our mothers do fine. But we can't afford to lose not one mother, not one baby. And so when we have our babies dying at high rates, it's really wrong. This March of Dimes report card really is an indication of those places where we have the highest rates of prematurity. And as I'm sad to say, the South is still at the top of the game. If all of those in red are where you have the highest rates of prematurity. Then from red, you go to yellow, which is the second highest rate, so the reds get a letter grade of F. In other words, they have just absolutely failed. Then you go to the yellows, and the yellow are C, so they're better. And then the blue is better still, and here's purple. And look, only one state has purple, where the babies are really, the prematurity rate is as we would hope it would be. Next slide, please. Now, we've been looking at the prematurity for some time, but recently we've been looking at something that we did not expect to happen. Can you, in 2020, we have women who are hemorrhaging and dying as a result of childbirth. With all the technology, with all the medicine, with all the advances that we made, we still have women who are dying. Now, we did not have this before, but it's almost as if it creeped up. We weren't paying a lot of attention to it. Now we look like less developed countries in the world in terms of maternal mortality. And the rates are particularly high for Black women and Native American women, as this chart will indicate. So what's going on? Next slide, please. So as you'll see in the next slide, there's something going on that we don't expect in terms of maternal mortality. And there's something going on in terms of infant mortality that we don't expect. And so this is a recent CDC report that says that college-educated women are higher at 1.6 times that of white women with less than a high school diploma. And women with college education or higher have greater rates of maternal mortality than for Black women, 5.2 times that of their white counterparts. What's the essence of this? The essence of it is that for well-educated women, we have higher rates of dying as a result of pregnancy complications. And it's not only for our counterparts, but for women who have only a high school diploma. Something desperately wrong. Next slide, please. So when we have this, so what we found is not only does this happen for maternal mortality, but it also happens in terms of infant mortality. I'll share this with everybody and with Dr. Cole as well. In the late 1980s, I received a survey that was passed out through our Alumni Association, which was asking us to talk about our pregnancy experiences. And the rationale that was being given for this survey was that there was something, there was a disparity in terms of birth outcomes for African American and white women. Well, I was insulted by the survey. I thought, okay, now you say our children can't learn and we're inferior about this, and now you're going to say we can't have babies. So I didn't fill out the survey. I got the survey a second time. Well, the survey was being administered to women and graduates of colleges in the AU Center, and most specifically Spelman College, and graduates from Agnes Scott, which is a predominantly white school. This is in the late 80s, and at that time, Agnes Scott was predominantly white, and Spelman was predominantly Black. Well, little did I know, by the 1980s, the early 1990s, they published a study, this very study that I decided I was not going to participate in. And another study was published as well. And what they found that well-educated African-American women had worse birth outcomes than their college-educated white counterparts, and that their birth outcomes were worse than white women who merely had a high school diploma. So here we have this was really a forecast of what we've seen in terms of maternal deaths. So it doesn't matter what kind of education we have. It doesn't matter what resources that we have. It doesn't matter what information that we have. We are at risk of having babies born too soon, too early, or having complications during pregnancy that can either lead to death or long-term health consequences. Next slide, please. So why is this? Why is this? So the first thing people will say, well, healthcare inequity, and that is absolutely true. Not just during pregnancy and birth, but before. We know that we do not get the same kinds of services, we do not get the same kinds of medications, we do not get the same kind of information, and so forth and so on. So there are real issues in terms of health equity. Inaccessible health care. In Washington, D.C., there are what we call birthplace deaths, where women just have no place to go where they're going to have, if they're pregnant and going to have babies. So those are issues. Culturally incompetent care. Care that does not address, does not respond to us, does not understand, does not integrate those lived experiences that we have as risk, as well as assets for us becoming healthy. Poverty. Poverty. So as I talk about well-educated women, it does not dismiss the fact that poverty is a major risk to health outcomes. Epigenetics. So when I mean epigenetics, what is the environment and the genetics? We know, for instance, that high levels of discrimination affect the telomere length, which is part of genetic material. And when those are shortened, it is related to shorter lifespan. So we know that something that's always attacking us can affect not only the way we live, but how long we live. And environmental factors, and I'm dealing with environmental justice, as well as the social and the physical. So those are the things that really are contributors to the worst birth outcomes that African American women have. But go forward, next one. But as Ella Baker would say, oppressed people, whatever the level of formal education, have the ability to understand and interpret the world around them, to see the world for what it is and to transform it. This has been the basis of the research that I've done these many years. I've always believed and continue to believe that the solutions to these problems and the explanations to why we're here in the first place lie in the voices and the lived experiences of African American women. This is my anthropological training, Dr. Cole. This is what I learned, but I also learned the psychology training in terms of how you measure. And so it's been the combination of the two that have brought me to the point in terms of the work that I do. But I start out with what Ella Baker says, that we, whatever the level of formal education that we have the ability to understand and interpret the world and come up with solutions. Next slide, please. So, talking to women over these many years, Black women from all walks of life, across the lifespan, I may say, women who I've talked to in the course of doing this research range from 17 to 80 something. So I've talked to Black women from all walks of life, from all stages of life. And ultimately, after they recognize that there's something wrong with the health care that they're receiving, after they understand that maybe we need to eat better and do more exercise, after they understand that there are other things that are going on, they acknowledge that stress is a major health crisis for us, stress. And so stress, from an evolutionary standpoint, is a threat to survival. But stress can be good in that sense because as we push back, as we fight against, it moves us to another level. But from a day-to-day standpoint, stress is an impediment, and response to those impediments and our goals, impediments to our goals and expectations. What do we want in our lives? And that can be as little as trying to go from point A to point B, and there are things that keep you from going there, like the traffic or what have you, or change in the route, to major things of where am I going to live, how am I going to live there, and so forth. We talk about stress as being acute and chronic and traumatic, and we're all talking about traumatic stress now in the times that we live in. Acute stress are those kind of things that kind of jolt us from us going along. But you know, and chronic stress are those things that happen day to day. But we draw these lines, but really they're not hard and fast. They, in fact, we have border crossing in terms of acute and chronic and traumatic stress, and we really are seeing that now. When we have stress, there are physiological and emotional responses. So we know that there are biological processes that start from the amygdala and cause us to have cortisol levels and other levels that are higher. And if they don't come down, they cause sickness. And if they don't come down, they lead to disease. And if they don't come down, they're contributors to death. So unabated stress, it compromises our immune systems, our vascular systems, and of course affects our psychosocial responses. Next slide. Now, we talk about stress not only in terms of what the exposure is, but our response to it. And we used in kind of those people, stressologists, would talk about the fight or flight notion that you confront a stressor and you either fight it or you run away from it. Now, from a more feminist standpoint, there are those who would say that a woman's response may look like tend and befriend, that we may, in our nurturing kind of way, capacity, that we may get into that way of dealing. But the point is that stress is both the exposure and the way that we adapt to it. And when there's this maladaptation, we have problems. So we talk about that as allostatic load. Research has looked at what they call manifestations of allostatic load in terms of blood pressure levels, cardiovascular response, some of the physiological that you can measure in the blood, that Black women bear a larger burden of allostatic load than Black men and white women. And it's more pronounced for non-poor Black women as compared to poor white women. So here we are with class doesn't protect us. Education doesn't protect us. There are things that are going on that really put us at risk. Next slide, please. So when we have stress, constant stress over a period of time, as I said, it affects those systems. And when it affects the systems, it can lead to hypertension, cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, and poor birth outcomes. And it also affects our mood, our issues of depression and anxiety and so forth. And so it's no wonder that when we look at the disparity research data, we see that we unfortunately have the high rates of hypertension, the high rates of cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes. And the interesting thing about hypertension, looking at the data that looks at young people, adolescents going up to about 20 years of age, you begin to see this disparity between Black and white in those 17 to 19-year-old Black women. You see indications of pre-diabetes. You see indications of hypertension. You see it early on. And so by the time they hit 20s, you begin to see this wide schism between Black and white women around those very conditions. So something is really going on. Next slide, please. So if we have these persistent, and how does it impact pregnancy? Well, in pregnancy, it suppresses the immune system, which can lead to infections, which also then can lead to premature birth. And it also increases the cortisol levels, which also means that it can stunt the growth that leads to low birth weight. And it also has implications for reducing the blood flow. So there's some very specific ways that stress impacts pregnancy. Now, where does our stress come from? And I've led up to this as I've talked about where the things that we think, because we have education, because we have resources, because we have information, because we have supposed access to good medical care. But what we have, next slide please, is racism, pure and simple. It is with good reasons that several health districts in the country, including DeKalb County, have declared racism as a public health risk. Not beat around the bush, just straight to the corner. Milwaukee was the first city in the United States to declare it as such, and it's based on a real a large body of scientific evidence to that point. Early on, researchers like Clark and Anderson and Clark and Williams saw that racism was a stressor for African Americans, looking at those physiological responses. So we know that when you do studies in laboratories where individuals will see, for instance, police files or what have you, we know blood pressure rises. We know that galvanic skin responses changes. We know that there are certain physiological things that happen. And we see differences between Black men and women. And so the women are more likely to hold those physiological responses longer than men, and therefore putting us at greater risk. Next slide, please. So, but it's not just race, it's gender too. It's gender too, and here I call upon those sisters, Patricia Hill Collins, Philomena said, and Kimberly Crenshaw, who have talked about the intersection, the multiplicative effects of race, gender, and class when they coincide together. And so it's not what we experience as Blacks, but what we experience as women as well. And that has to do with the roles and responsibilities we have, and having to do added duty, having to do that much more, and whatever it is, because of our race and our gender, and not in the same way that our white counterparts have to do this. Next slide, please. So, what do women say? Going back to Ella Baker, you ask women what it is. What do women say? Well, women say that under-resourced communities, discrimination in the workplace, financial obligations, financial burdens, nurture overload, abuse and neglect, toxic relationships, racism and sexism, and care and protection of children. Next slide, please. You can still hear me? Can you still hear? Okay, good. If you can still hear me. So, this one about protection of children. Well, I'll get to that. So, looking at all those things that I just told you that women have talked about, I call this contextualized stress. The way we measure stress is more in the psychological domain arena. Is more generalizable stress. But I want to think about contextualized stress. Stress that comes from the places where we live and work and go about our lives, and stress that is shaped by our identities as Black, gender, sexuality, age. All of those things provide a context for the stressors that we experience. And so my colleagues and I have published these papers, and what the two that are cited here deals with contextualized stress and depression in well-educated women. And what we found is that as they had contextualized stress, as they had these exposures to the things that I mentioned, and not as much of the support that they needed, as that went up, as stress went up, so did their levels of depression. The second study, we found out that it really didn't matter whether they started out middle class or they started out lower class and then had upward mobility, that you still saw this strong relationship between that contextualized stress and depression during pregnancy. Now, I know everybody in this call knows what the dangers are of depression during pregnancy. The dangers of is really a woman cannot function if she's depressed during pregnancy. And it puts her at higher risk for postpartum depression, which means now she can no longer take care of herself or her baby, which means that baby is at risk of failure to thrive and so forth. So it's a very serious matter when we have women who are depressed during pregnancy. Next slide, please. So, care and protection of children, police violence. couple of weeks ago, I wrote an op-ed in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about George Floyd, and we all heard him cry out for his mother. Cry out for his mother as his life was being snuffed out. And so what did that mean? What that meant to me was both what was his mother in his life and who was his mother for her own life, because they both were at risk. And so the researchers started to look at what is police violence doing to pregnant women. What are we thinking when we carry a life in our womb? And what is the prospect for that child? The first study by Bohr and others, what they did, they looked not so much at pregnancy, but they looked at what were the numbers of mental health days that were taken after a police episode. And not surprising, African Americans had to take more days off after there was police episodes of police violence, and had to take them off months after it happened. In Baltimore, after the Baltimore episode, the Baltimore riots that took place, we saw that pregnant women in that city showed an uptick in terms of signs of depression. They eventually went down, but this meant that this was really affecting them. In Atlanta, Georgia, my colleagues and I looked at negative police encounters, not that they had happened, but they had anticipated. We asked a question like, I'm paraphrasing, is my children more likely to have negative encounters? My children's youth are more likely to have negative encounters with the police. And for those women who responded yes to that, they were more apt to have signs of depression during pregnancy. Now, this was a couple of years in Clayton County before we had the cases, the episodes that we had here in the city. That said that wherever it's happening, we're thinking about it. And pregnant women are thinking about this as they plan to give birth to a Black child. Next slide, please. So here we are, George Floyd and coronavirus. Trauma, trauma, trauma. Everybody's in the trauma. And what do we do now? And this is trauma on top of the ongoing experiences of racism and sexism that women have experienced, Black women have experienced now. All these other studies that I've shown to you are things that have happened, they're past studies. At this moment, we now have this on top of the existing experiences that have happened in our community. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Well, you know, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I've spent most of my day looking at the homegoing of John Lewis. So we've got to get in some good trouble, and we got to really get in good trouble now. And we have to start out to think about what is it that we believe in. Now, I believe first and foremost that health is a human right, that everybody should have it, that health is a human right, and we should expect health and quality, accessible and affordable health care for everyone. It's supported by equitable conditions across all sectors representing the social determinants of health. That means we've got to have good education. There's no doubt about it. Now, how we do that, I don't know, but there's smart people in this country who have figured out. Transportation. When you have deserts where women cannot get good health care, part of it is they can't get there, and they can't get there because the transportation is not there for them. Housing. We are in a housing crisis. We are in a housing crisis. I heard someone today talk about a bill that was passed in the 1960s, which gave churches and nonprofits the means to build affordable housing. We've got to have affordable housing. We've got to have employment and fair and decent wages. To fight over the $600 now that's being taken away is unconscionable. Now people know that there's better, and they will fight for better. And so we have to have all of those things, because those things which are part of the social determinants along with healthcare, will help us to improve the outcomes in the birth and maternal outcomes that we now witnessing. Next slide, please. And there we are on the streets. I wish I could go on there. I can't get there. But that's all right. We need to support this generation. I tell them, I said, I can get on the phone and I have a few dollars for you too. So we must continue the fight. It was just really something to hear the speakers today who talked about the things that had happened with John Lewis and what happened in Nashville and the laws and the bills that were passed. And I'm hopeful because I see things that are happening. I was on a call the other day for the Black Mama Maternal Health Caucus, which is putting forth major legislation to support the health care for Black mamas and to support the advancing and expanding the health workers in all regards. So I am hopeful. Next slide, please. Turning to the voices of women, some years ago, I had a project where I asked women who lived in one of the public housing areas, part of the Healthy Start, really the Dunbar Center area. And I asked the women to take these cameras and go out and take pictures, capturing a day in their lives. But there was one caveat. I asked them to journal about it and to tell me something that was an asset, not what was wrong, but what they had to bring to the table. What would they do? What did they have? So I got this picture and I said, okay, it's a pantry, no food to speak of there. What is it? So then I read the journal article and the journal entry, and the woman said, you know, my mama lives down the street and we eat with her every day. Well, there was obviously there's something very good in that. But had I seen just the first side of it, I would have thought, oh my goodness, they're starving. But on the other side, there was something else that was going on that could have been missed, that really could have missed. So we have to listen to the voices of African American women, and we have to interrogate the assets that we have. Because we're always talking about what we don't have and what we can't get and what's going on, but there are assets in our community that we're not fully tapping on. Next slide, please. So I'm going to come to the end now. And in this meeting where I did photo voice, and that picture that I just showed you, there were other people who looked at the pictures and, you know, they gave the negative interpretation, and then the women gave their asset interpretation of what was going on. And so I gathered this I used this to kind of start an umbrella around what I call Save 100 Babies and mothers too, really. So we have to have healthy families. We have to have enduring faith. We have to believe that there's more. And in this time, more than ever, we have to believe that there's more. We have to have positive social support and advance that. I am really excited in some ways when I go online now at all the things that are happening in terms of how we take care of ourselves in this moment. And I'm seeing some of the most innovative kinds of things about exercise, about talk groups, about just all kinds of things that even at this time, which is a down or shift, is more than a down. But we have to create and develop and advance those positive support systems. Safe and affordable housing. We have to have healthy nutrition and quality education, fair employment and livable wages, accessible transportation, and quality health care. As I close, I've been thinking about this book that I read many years ago. I think the author spoke for me, said, it's all I learned. I'm paraphrasing, everything I needed for life I learned in kindergarten, something to that effect. And I started on my career, my first job was as a preschool teacher. And so for those of you who've had that experience, you know the little ones, if you're taking them somewhere, you have them to hold hands. And so Fulcrum said, remember always, hold hands. And we have to hold hands now. Look both ways. And we have to look all kinds of ways with all kinds of eyes to see what we're doing. And keep your eyes on the direction where you're supposed to go. I thank you, my sisters. And let's save mothers and babies.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes,
that was remarkable.
thank you.
I first encountered this issue on the campus of Spelman College, visiting with some young NCNW sisters. They invited me down to a meeting, and they focused in on infant mortality and maternal health. I had no idea that women with college degrees who are Black were struggling so with depression and systemic racism that it was making them sick and making the babies sick too. But thank you for bringing this issue to the forefront for all of us to confront. Dr. Cole, you couldn't see her, was nodding all the way
I can see
through
her.
your presentation. She just,
I
every
can
once in a
see
while,
her.
she would do like this. So at this point, I want to give her the privilege of asking the first question or making the first comment, and then maybe we'll take a few more from the audience. How is that?
Okay, that's fine. I'm trying to turn up the volume. You see Dwayne Jackson, for people who see that, that's my husband. That's not my name, but thank God for him. Excuse me, Dwayne. Never mind. I'll try to hear you.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, I'll try to hear you.
Can you hear me now, my Spelman sister?
I can.
Oh, good Dr. Fleet of Mass Jackson. I must be repetitive and say that this is a special series we're doing, but I knew that tonight was going to be beyond special, that I would have a reunion with you. And Fleeta, I must tell you, your ability to define a problem and to present a call to action for solving that problem has just gotten better and better and better and better over the years.
Thank you.
It was truly an informative and a deeply inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
So, among the things that I was so touched by was the way that you really continue to insert the call to us. This is our responsibility. And so, say once again, what are the very concrete things that we, if you're beyond the childbearing age, if you are in the childbearing age, what are 2 or 3 specific things that each of us can do to make sure that we have healthy mamas and healthy babies? Because if we don't have babies, what kind of future do we have?
Right. Thank you for that question, Dr. Cole. And there are a couple of things that I can think of that we can do. And I thought about this more and more in terms of how we begin to organize. We have to, in whatever state we are, we have to fight for Medicaid extension and to make sure that there are various legislation that's on the books that have been advanced now, that are Medicaid expansion, which will provide medical care at least 6 months after a woman delivers, up to a year. And so we really have to look into that, because in the case of maternal mortality, most of the women die after they deliver, and certainly and too many after the 6 weeks time. So there are things that are happening now in terms of medical care that we have to advocate for in terms of that Medicaid extension. That's absolutely one of the things. The other thing that we have to do is that from a legislation standpoint, I would recommend that everybody look at the Mama Bus bill. It is a collection of bills that is now that has been developed by the Black Maternal Health Caucus. Alma Adams is one of the leaders for that. And look into that bill and see what it is that they need in terms of support. It does a number of things. It goes from calling for the expansion of Black and people of color who are in the maternal and child health field. It provides money for research. It deals with maternity issues in the military. It deals with issues of opioid and mental health. It deals with an array of concerns that we're going to have to get behind. I think the other thing that we have to do is there are organizations that have, and find out what organizations in our city do support pregnant women. So I've been working with the March of Dimes in terms of some of the things that they do in terms of baby showers and all kinds of things to support those women who have had babies who are very fragile, who are young, who just need certain supplies and supports and those kinds of things. And as a person, higher education, as someone who's a champion, who is just a superstar in higher education, we have to continue to advance to have more people who are in the field, that we create more doctors, that we create more nurses, we create nurse midwives, that we understand that that there are a lot of individuals who can be part of the team for saving mothers and babies, from doulas to community health workers and so forth. So it is at the level of understanding what are those organizations are who are in your location, like Healthy Start and those, and see where you can help them and what they have been successful in doing. It also is the legislative arena that we have to push forth to make sure those dollars are there. And overall, continue to fight for equity. Poor housing is a healthcare issue. Poor nutrition is a healthcare risk.
Can you repeat
Lack
the name?
of resources because of jobs and underemployment, and low wages are healthcare issues. So understand that all of those pose a risk to a mother and a family, and that is embodied, and ultimately that can affect both the health of the mother and the child.
Thank you. I think I see our sister Edie. It's back to you. And to Brother Johannes.
Thank you for that question. Are there other questions?
Yes, ma'am. Someone asked, can you repeat the name of the bill?
The name of the what?
Name of the bill you mentioned we should look out for. Mom's bill, did you say?
The name of the building?
The bill, Alma Adams bill.
Oh, Mama Bus.
Mama
Bus. M-O-M, Mama Bus. And it's named that because it's several individual bills. So I suspect the strategy is to put them all forth at one time and then, see which ones will ultimately be passed. But it's the Mama Bus.
Are there any comments, Mr. Johannes?
We have some other questions.
Okay.
Young lady asked, with the pending vaccine for coronavirus, should a woman who's pregnant get the vaccine?
Okay, that's a good question. And right now we don't know. We're in the testing stages. I do think that all of us have to consider and make sure that we do have enough African Americans who are in the testing. I mean, and everybody will have to decide that, but if people, feel comfortable enough to do that, we do need to be a part of the testing. This is always an issue for us in terms of scientific integrity, whether or not we're going to be guinea pigs, and I do understand it. But I also understand that we have to have representation to know how, in fact, we will be affected. Now, pregnant women represent a very special category at this time. And at this particular juncture, I suspect they're not being recruited for the trials. So we will know in time because pregnant women can be infected. And so at some point, the vaccine should be available to them because as we are hearing now, the cases of mothers who have been infected, you know, and the sadness of that is they have their babies and have to be separated from those children. And that's a real issue now in terms of giving birth and not having your loved ones to be with you. This is a real struggle. And so some women are opting for home births as a result of that and looking at all the alternatives because of the restriction due to coronavirus.
How can we advocate for higher learning institutions to have doula programs?
Would you repeat that for me?
How can we advocate for higher learning institutions to have doula programs?
How can we advocate for higher institutions to have programs? Is that what you asked?
For doulas, the women who assist in birth, I think it's D-O-U-L-A, doula.
For doulas.
Doulas, yes, doulas.
How can we advocate for doulas?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yes. One of the things that's interesting, I didn't know a lot about doulas until I, got more into the maternal mortality arena. And one of the things we have to recognize is that because we've been so mobile, individuals may or may not be around those individuals in the family who could be in close contact with them during pregnancy. So we do have a lot of people who really don't have the social support that they need for things that women traditionally passed on from one woman to another to say this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And so doulas are important because they become both support and advocates for a woman. They provide the information about what is going to happen. They can go, we partner with them in terms of what happens in the doctor's visits. So doulas are going to take on a more and more important role as we understand what they do. The issue is, how do they get paid? And this is where this is where policy comes into play. Who gets paid in terms of being part of the maternal care team? And they have to make a living too. So as it stands now, doulas for many are women who can afford it, and therefore it becomes something for women who have the means and not necessarily for women who don't have the means, or for the women who do it in any way. They are not paid, and therefore they're in financial difficulty doing the work that they love to do. And so I'm a strong advocate for doulas, but for doulas to become part of the maternal care team so that they get paid like anybody else who's part of it. And so the reimbursement in Medicaid has to include, and there are advocates for this. It's not there yet, but there's advocacy for this so that whether they partner with a physician or however that they do that, they in fact get paid. But I'm a strong advocate for doulas because they provide that additional support that many women need, particularly since individuals are separated from family, don't necessarily have the resources that we traditionally had around pregnancy and birth.
Dr. Jackson, can you discuss the implicit bias of healthcare providers that impact Black women and what we can do to eliminate it?
Okay, so implicit bias. I understand the utility of implicit bias, but I think it gets some people off the hook because I've seen people do implicit bias training. They say, well, I have my biases, and then somebody said, well, I have my biases, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about racism. We're not talking about the fact that I may not like a white man who's tall and talks a certain way. We're not talking about that. We're talking about racism. So as long as implicit bias training includes a real strong focus on racism, I'm okay. But if it is something that is going to get everybody off the hook and we never get where we need to go, I have real problems with it. Now, implicit bias training has certainly been a way in which we have started the conversation. So I give credit there. It started the conversation. Implicit bias training in policing, implicit bias training in healthcare. But what we do know is that there are, because of a history of racism, which has said that we as a people were inferior physically, intellectually, emotionally, all the ways that you could name it. That has meant that we do not get the same quality of health care that others get. That has meant that we have been denied what America says it should give all of its citizens. So implicit bias is a starting point, but it's not the end point because we have to go deeper.
Are there any more questions?
Ms. Thomas, if you can, your mic is open to ask your question.
I didn't hear you.
We have an audience member who wants to ask a question.
All right, she writes, does the audience know that in the state of Georgia, we passed legislation to expand Medicaid postpartum from 2 months to 6 months?
I heard the last part of, would you repeat it?
Does the audience know that the state of Georgia has passed legislation to expand Medicaid postpartum from 2 months to 6 months? Since Black women die 3 to 4 times more than any race, it was a point of legislation that was fully funded.
Okay, I heard that we did pass the legislation for 6 months in Georgia for postpartum care. And I didn't hear the last part of it. Now, the devil is in the detail. While we have passed it for 6 months, what will happen in that 6 months is critical. So we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do in terms of making sure that the quality of the care that women receive in those 6 months is responsive to whatever risks they have and or whatever we're trying to advance in terms of positive birth outcomes. So yes, we did get it passed, but again, what will be in there? Because one of the things I've seen before, we've had special Medicaid, I forgot what it is that they call it, but we've had special situations where women could get care extended beyond the 6 weeks. Unfortunately, the physicians didn't know it. They weren't aware of it. They didn't know what to do with it. And so while we have these 6 months Medicaid coverage, it's going to be critical that the providers understand what this means in terms of the services that they should provide women to protect their health for now and future pregnancies, or for well women health.
Dr. Jackson, can y'all hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, Dr. Jackson, this is State Representative Mabel Thomas. How you doing?
Hey.
All right, I'm trying to what I'm really trying to get y'all to see, if you would, is it wasn't just that we passed move from 2 months to 6 months. What we had to, in order to move to 2 months to 6 months in the middle of a pandemic, is important. And what it is that we had to organize at another level. And what I do best is organize. So, but what it is that we put in 20, we fully funded it. And we fully funded it to the tune of 21 million. And then we put an additional 500,000 in for Morehouse School of Medicine so that they can do research. They call it the Center for Excellence. And they say they want to do research, training, and community engagement. So what had to happen in other words, it's a big deal because you had to get that we the worst in the country. And subsequently, when we had organized enough, Black women had organized, and this specifically, I made sure with my experience to be able to say to white women organizations, and I'm sorry if they're on the phone if they feel any way, that this would be a Black woman-led movement, and we kept it that way no matter what. Whether the group, there is a group in Georgia called Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, Miss Elise Blossingame and others. But the real deal is that they have been the people who every time there's a news story, somebody puts the mic to them, and they actually say words like this. Well, this is an important issue in Georgia. However, it's really not that many women dying at childbirth. But even though it is some women dying, I think that's important. And then I'll say to them the next day when I see them, don't you ever go on radio or TV and start acting like Black women dying is just something just casual, unless you can give me 37 women or white women that's willing to die at childbirth to every 1,000, then you can start talking like that on the radio. So in other words, this is the way we have to handle this because otherwise everybody wanted to play like they wanted to pass postpartum Medicaid. But the real deal is the original bill was House Bill 693, which was put in 2019. And I'm the second signature, Renita Shannon, the first signature. And what we could not even get a hearing from the Health and Human Services Committee, because what they do is once Black women or most time Black legislators start moving on any bill, they in turn take the bill. That's what people don't know. We work hard in the General Assembly and they take our bills. And so the bill that eventually passed in the Georgia General Assembly was 693 was ours. They didn't give us a hearing, but the bill they passed was House Bill 11114. All of a sudden, I'm drawing a blank on it, but 1114. Okay, that passed. Okay, but how did it pass? Because they decided to do a study committee. Because we had to build, we didn't have to do a study committee. We already knew the facts and stuff. They said we would do a study committee. So they pulled a dream team of white people together, legislators together, and they did a dream team with the chair of appropriation, the chair of the Republican caucus, the speaker pro tem, 2 medical doctors, and the chair of the Health and Human Services, which is Representative Cooper out of Marietta. So they pulled this study committee together. And so when I saw it, I knew they was finna make a move on the bill. So I came to the study committee, and what I said to them is, I want an amendment to change it from 5 members of the committee to add 2 African American women legislators to the committee. They was finna have a committee with no African American women legislators on it. What came out of the committee was the number one suggestion that it go from 2 to 12, because our bill was originally 2 to 12. But what they did is come up with a compromise, and the compromise was the 22 million, and we had it in the budget before the pandemic. When the pandemic came, they used the pandemic to say they had to cut our money. They told members of our coalition, I pulled together a coalition of reproductive justice folks, midwives, doulas, medical people, and regular folks. And we met bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, and trying to make sure that the strategy was put in place. What we found that the challenge with this is that even though we were in the House and we passed the bill, we sent it over to the Senate. There are 8 Black women in the Senate. They had no clue about, all they knew about was generally maternal mortality. So that means when the House budget comes first, we send it over to them. They didn't have a clue. And so the people were telling them, oh, we're going to have to cut this because of this. We cut it because of this. And we're going to put $5 million in, and then y'all come back in January and fight. Well, I knew that was not going to go for me because I had already decided that this was my last cycle. I'm not applying for a re-election to that. I've done the work there a lot of times unrecognized, but that's okay. But the point of the story is it took a lot to get this money back in this budget, and it took a lot to put it in. So even though, as you said, Doc, we're going to have to make sure that the providers know and that type of thing, But this is something that we cannot step over when Georgia is so backwards, so draconian. And for us to
It
pull
is.
this bill off and put and fully fund it and then put a piece of money in for Morehouse School of Medicine is really something to celebrate. And what I know about organizers, you organize around successes. I don't know, and I know, I know, Janice, we've been knowing each other for years, Attorney Master, we've been knowing each other for years. But the same token, I want to see how I, with the skill set that I have, organizing and the work, my body of work over these years I've stood, it's been in healthcare. I'm the author of the first mandated benefit in the state of Georgia, requires insurance companies to pay for mammograms, prostate cancer tests, and the mammograms, Pap and the Pap and the prostate cancer test. I I amended the rape shield law in the state of Georgia to make it hard for a woman's past sexual history to be brought into rape cases. I gave all fire trucks in the state of Georgia first responders license, so if they get to a scene of accident, they can administer IV and other things. I'm the author of CJ Law, the hit and run bill in the state of Georgia, and the list goes on. I'm one of the most accomplished state representatives in Georgia, going undistinguished as an activist.
Well,
I
I
passed
can
more bills.
certainly testify to that.
Mabel, I'm going to interrupt you because, first of all, how dare you acknowledge you've known Janice Mathis all these years and I don't get a nod. Hello, my sister. We at NCNW know of your work. Many, many of us know of your work, and we thank you for that work. We're getting very close now to the end of our time, so is there maybe one other question, Mr. Johannes, known as Brother J?
Can someone get maternal health where can someone get maternal health at the beginner level?
Explain that. I'm not sure what you're asking.
How can someone get Black maternal health help at the beginner levels?
Oh, at the beginning, someone who needs help.
Yes.
Who needs help. Okay. So one of the places that you go to is to your public health departments. And if you go to your public health departments, they can give you referrals to all of the health providers that are in the area. Someone just really because they first of all will do the pregnancy test and then determine where can give you guidance in terms of providers. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Well, we are at the time to conclude our webinar tonight. It certainly has been stimulating. I have known Mabel Thomas a very long time, distinguished legislator and organizer, just as she said. But we've got one final distinguished guest that we would be remiss if we did not recognize the co-chair of our National Program Committee, Dr. Tamara Wiles Lawson. Where is Dr. Tamara? Is she still with us?
Yes.
There she is.
Yes.
She looks like a teenager, but she is not. She is a PhD. She did postdoctoral work, fellow at the University of Maryland. She was director of African American outreach for the Democratic National Committee at one point. She worked on Al Gore's presidential campaign. She worked for, if you live in Washington, you know that Cora Masters Berry is responsible for the Recreation Wish List Committee that does a fantastic job working with children and tennis and academics. She's on their board of directors. But if you really want to know who she is, she's the executive director of the Office of Collective Impact for the Washington Nationals Dream Foundation. Homegirl got a real nice job doing real good work. But if you really want to know who somebody is, go to Twitter. Don't read the resume. Go to Twitter, and you'll find out that she's an unapologetic agitator for racial justice and champion for youth and LGBTQIA ally in training. That's how she designates herself. So, co-chair of our National Program Committee, along with Paulette Norville Lewis, keeps us on the straight and narrow, gives us great advice. Tamara, please say a few words of closing to us.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Mathis. Many thanks to all of you for joining us this evening for this NCNW webinar and Dr. Jackson's presentation of such critical and relevant information. Having spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital, deathly ill at 7 months pregnant, her presentation resonated with me deeply. As our time together comes to a close, we want to leave you with 3 important pieces of information, and I'll go through them very quickly. First, we're so excited to invite you to attend our annual convention taking place virtually this year, beginning September 24th and ending September 27th. We promise you it will be as compelling and fun as it always is. A detailed schedule will be released by August 10th. Please note that the convention registration fee is $100, and for college students and newly graduated folks in 2020, the registration fee is $50. The early bird registration has been extended to September 1st. Second, please visit the NCNW website for webinar recordings just like this one. You'll be able to find past webinars at ncnw.org, and tonight's webinar video will be posted by August 14th. We encourage you to let other folks know that it's there. So much information was shared that I think would be helpful to everyone, so please spread the word. Generally, webinar videos are posted about 2 weeks after the webinar, and you'll also find great speaker PowerPoint presentations like Dr. Jackson's there from past webinars. We host them every second and fourth Thursday at 7 p.m., but please note that this series will resume in September, and there are 3 more webinars in this special, Healing Our Children, and we remain incredibly grateful to Toyota for their sponsorship. Finally, in these uncertain and challenging times, it is critical that we find community within our trusted institutions that are providing invaluable trainings, resources, and information, and being led like extraordinary women like Dr. Cole. NCNW continues to do just that, and we encourage you to consider joining if you haven't already. The annual membership fee is $50. If you go to ncnw.org and click the membership tab, you'll see a list of various membership categories, and you can pay on the website. All you need is your credit card and your address. If you prefer, you can also click through and find information of our 300, that's right, 300 sections of NCNW, and contact one of those sections directly. We really hope you're going to join us in September, and we encourage you to stay healthy and safe and have a lovely evening.
And I'd like to say something. I thank you so much, and thank you, Mabel, for all the work you've done, because she's right. We have made progress here in Georgia. We got a long ways to go still. But I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to be here tonight. And let's all work together to save one another, to save mothers, and to save babies. Thank you.